All right.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to High Definition Pod. This podcast that is. I'm Maurice.
I'm Therese.
And we are back for another episode. We're going to kind of skip some of the preliminaries that we normally do. For those of you, if this is your first time joining us, we are a platform that's all about having conversation and dialogue. We do our best to come from a biblical worldview. So you may agree with us or you may disagree with us. The only thing we will not tolerate is we will not tolerate disrespect. On all of our social media platforms, you will find a link tree. It will have all the links to every platform that we're on. It will also include our email address. Feel free to inbox us or email us with any of your thoughts or concerns or questions. And we are more than happy to dialogue with you and converse. So without further ado, we have a very special guest on with us for this episode. He is currently one of the sitting state senators for the state of South Carolina. We are actually two of his constituents in his area. We have none other than Senator Josh Kimbrell. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Well, good to be with you in high definition. Good to be here.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So just to give everyone a little introduction to who you are, just tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into politics? Where does your story begin?
Well, I was born and raised in Spartanburg County. So this is home turf for me. I represent the area where I grew up, and most of my family lives. So native South Carolina, went to undergrad North Greenville, grad school Gardner-Webb. I was a 10-year banker. And then I ended up running an aircraft charter company, which I still do now, aircraft brokerage and leasing. My wife is a realtor. I also have a real estate license, though I do planes more than the real estate, but she does that. We have two little boys. One goes to Spartanburg Christian Academy. One goes to Sugar Ridge Elementary in District 2. And I worked in the governor's office back in college. That was Mark Sanford. That was before Argentina. I like to point that out, before Argentina.
Yes.
And I did 10 years on Christian Talk 660. I did 10 years of radio, 4 years on Fox News National. There's a commentary on the weekends on Fox News. I was the chairman of the South Carolina Republican Party, the Spartanburg County Republican Party, and a member of the executive committee of the South Carolina Republican Party. And I then was elected to the South Carolina Senate in 2020. So it's good to be with you. It's good. I appreciate the Christian worldview perspective y'all have. I have the same view. I jokingly tell people that I've been baptized 3 times. I think the third one took. The first time I was 12, so I believed, but I didn't believe. And so I recommitted my life to Christ in high school and really meant it and got baptized again. And then I did one time ceremonially when I was on a government trip, a political trip before I was elected to Israel. So I got dunked in the Sea of Galilee. I thought I might walk on it. I fell right in. And then the pastor dunked me. So I've been 3 times baptized. I don't know if that helps or not, but hopefully.
Hey, the more the merrier, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, so as a sitting state senator, so you're not quite, is it a full-time, are you a full-time public servant? I think you just mentioned it. So you also have other endeavors that you're involved in.
Yeah, so in the state senate, I mean, look, it's essentially the most busy, technically they'd say we're a part-time legislature because you're in session from January to May, but you're still on duty beyond that. I mean, I'm on various committees and boards, and I have staff that works for me, in the Senate year round. And, even on days I'm not in Columbia, I go to various functions. So it's a full-time, part-time job, and I still run a business.
Awesome.
So explain to the people why it is important to pay attention to your local and state government a little more than the federal.
Well, it's important to pay attention to both, but I would say if you look at all levels of government that affect your life, the federal government's going to make Fox News every night. You're going to see that on national news. But the vast majority of decisions that are made that affect your family, that affect your kids, that affect your day-to-day life will be made by your state government, not your federal or local. It's going to be state. So, and in South Carolina, we're what's called a legislatively dominant state. So while the governor is still certainly the head of state and the single most influential individual, the power of the governor's office in this state is not as great as maybe in other states. So the legislature has a lot of influence. The Senate particularly, I don't say that to be self-serving, but the Senate in South Carolina is very, we got a lot of authority. So for example, I'm personally involved in appointing local magistrate judges. So if you get a traffic ticket, you go before a magistrate that was probably recommended for appointment by me if you're in my district, or another senator based on where you are. We vote on the entire state budget. We deal with everything from education policy to what your kids are taught in school, and criminal code, and the vast majority of decisions that affect the day-to-day life of state government. So focusing only on Washington will miss a lot of what's going to affect your family. And a lot of these decisions, whether it's defending the right to life or talking about educational choice for your kids, your family, those are state decisions, not necessarily federal. And in our system of government, as our founders envisioned it, I heard a fun joke one time that said America was designed by a bunch of geniuses, so it could be run by a bunch of idiots. I'm not sure how to take that as a current elected official. But the idea was that there's a separation of powers between the federal government, the state, and then even within the federal government, the state government itself, 3 different branches. And that was a very smart thing on behalf of our founders, because I know you come at this program from a Christian worldview, which I share. And our founders believed that men were fallen, right? If you read the Federalist Papers, you'll read Federalist 51, Alexander Hamilton or James Madison rather, makes the argument that if men were angels, there'd be no need for government. If men were governed by angels, there'd be no need to restrain the government. But since neither is the case, government's instituted among men, and then constitutions are used to restrain the government. So our system of government was founded decidedly in a Judeo-Christian worldview, and the belief that human beings are flawed and fallible, so don't put too much power in the hands of any one group of people.
That's interesting. I'm big on doing my own research and just verifying things. There's a big talk about the Constitution being a flawed document, so to speak. I have my thoughts on that, but I guess there's one particular belief that it was written by flawed men, so we shouldn't pay attention to it. But I guess coming from a biblical worldview, if we were to take that same logic, then we technically wouldn't be paying attention to the Bible, because most of the Bible was actually written by flawed men as well. If we were
the difference between the Bible and the Constitution is, of course, the Bible is inspired by the Holy Spirit directly.
Right.
While I believe that those who wrote the Bible were certainly who penned the words were flawed people. I mean, David, for example, was a flawed man, but he also was inspired by the Holy Spirit when he wrote it. So you have to look at it is the word. The word is divinely inspired. The guys who were inspired were not divine. Mm-hmm. The Constitution is not in the same sense as the scriptures divinely inspired. That being said, I do believe that God superintended the founding of the country. I mean, if you read a lot of history of the United States, we're not a theocracy, but there's no question that we were a country that largely was based on a Judeo-Christian worldview. Now, where people pick apart the Constitution, and I think this is where we, in modern times, we've lost track of history. There's no question that the original sin of the founding of America was that we allowed slavery to exist for the first 90 years of our existence. And so I've heard people attack the Constitution saying, well, it's a document that was designed by racists to perpetuate racism.
That's what I've heard.
That's not true. So now, granted, the Constitution in its earliest form did not provide for emancipation as it should have. What most people don't know, that 56 people signed the Declaration of Independence. Of the 56 signers, 2/3 were abolitionists. In other words, they were members of abolition societies. In the Constitutional Convention, the United States came one vote short of abolishing slavery at the founding of the country. Oh, wow. So to say that the Constitution was written by slaveholders exclusively for slaveholders is not accurate. Certainly, the original sin of the American founding was that that was allowed to exist. But we're the only country in the history of the world that ever went to war with itself over that. And Abraham Lincoln was a big believer in the Constitution and essentially saw the idea of emancipation as fulfilling the calling of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. In fact, Frederick Douglass, who was formerly a bound slave who became emancipated, who led the cause of abolition alongside Lincoln during the Civil War, openly said that the Constitution was an amazingly inspired document that needed to be applied to the people as a whole. So I don't think that the Constitution was a racist document or founded or written for racist purposes. Certainly certain racist people in the beginning did not live up to America's founding, but 2/3 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were abolitionists who believed in emancipation from day one. And so to say that the United States was founded by folks that did largely believe that all men are created equal is true. It took us 90 years to get to that Civil War that led to emancipation, but this has been a country that's been a continual work in progress to live up to those values.
Wow.
So that's loaded.
Very, very loaded.
That's very informative, literally.
I did know that about some of the founding fathers being abolitionists.
In fact, since we're South Carolinians, one of the guys, so Alexander Hamilton, who was one of the writers of the Federalist Papers, he was friends with a guy named John Lawrence, who was actually the son of Henry Lawrence, after whom Lawrence County, South Carolina is named. And John Lawrence also was a big abolitionist. His dad, Henry, was not, but John was. So even in the earliest days of South Carolina, we had John Lawrence, who was friends with Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, who worked with James Madison to help write the Constitution, who believed in abolition of slavery from the beginning of the American Republic.
Wow. So since we're kind of on this vein, of course, you can tell we're of the African American community, of course.
Of course.
Look, my mother's side, I'm not African American. My mother's side was Cherokee. I have a lot of Cherokee ancestry on my mother's side. So I jokingly tell people the reason I'm a Republican is that the Democrats are the ones that marched the Cherokees to Missouri. But I jokingly say that, of course, but not untrue that they did that. But look, I have family members on my mother's side that are full-blooded Cherokee Native American, Indians, and there's plenty of people over the years who tried to convince me that the country's racist because I don't believe that. I mean, do I think certainly people did bad things? Yeah. Do I think the country gives as much freedom to my ancestors as anybody else? Yes, I do. I think America is a great country that's continually worked to live up to its promise.
Right. I think, and like I said, kind of building on kind of the vein that we're on right now, I guess in the African American community, I know with me growing up, it was always the rhetoric or the belief was, Republicans are racist, and we're always just told to vote Democrat. So just no matter what, that's how it's kind of always been told. I'm kind of one, I like to ask questions, but as a member of the Republican Party, like how would you address that to the African American community, and how do you feel the party as a whole should address that?
Well, I mean, first off, anybody that says that respectfully is just not understanding of history. The Republican Party was founded for the express purpose of abolition. And I'm always amazed to listen to people who tell me that the Republican Party is the party of slavery. No, it's not true at all. I mean, the Democratic Party was the party of slavery. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. The people who voted for the 13th Amendment to emancipate slavery were Republicans. And so now, granted, over time, history gets lost and things get twisted. In modern times, what's largely happened, and we've had the mainstream media contribute to this narrative, is that Republicans are particularly anti-Black community or anti-immigrant or anything else. None of that's true. Republicans, I can speak for me, and I'll talk for the party as a whole. I used to be a local party chairman. Look, I've never judged anybody based on color, ever. I mean, I care what people believe and their values and who they are, nothing else. The company that I run by day, for example, and I hate even using this, but I'm using it as an example. I listen to all these woke folks talk about how we need more diversity in companies. Well, most of the people who say that are white executives in a majority white company. I don't talk about woke doctrine, but if you look at my company, I never set out to do this. I didn't have a policy in place that, okay, half my workforce has to be minority or half doesn't. But if you look at my team, the executive team who runs the company with me that I'm the CEO of, my top two deputies, one is Black, one is Hispanic. I didn't do that intentionally. I just did it because they were qualified and I love these guys. My chief flight attendant's a woman. Most of my staff over the years, I actually did the math, 70% of my staff were minorities because I judge people based on who they are and what they can do, not anything else. So as a Republican, I believe that the greatest minority is the individual. I don't care about groups. I don't care about lumping people into groups. We're all human beings. And whether you're Black or white or Hispanic or Indian or Native American or whatever you are, ultimately you're you. And I believe that God views every person individually. So my view of the Republican Party is we believe in individual liberty. I think the Democratic Party in modern times has worked really hard to try to gin up division and play groups against each other to try to win elections. But let's just go back through history. Let's go as recently as 1964, the Civil Rights Act. 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed by a Congress with Republican votes. So Democrats voted against it, most of them. So look, I'm not saying Democrats are racist, but I don't like it when Democrats say Republicans are racist, because if we want to play that game, the Democratic Party was far more opposed to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that abolished slavery, granted equality under the law, and voting rights to former bound slaves. They voted against that. Republicans voted for it. The 1964 Civil Rights Act, Republicans voted for that. Democrats voted against it. What's happened now is that we've had this really left-wing movement to push for this a pretty radical view of human sexuality and gender identity. And they use the civil rights movement as a hobby horse, really, to try to guilt people into supporting this crazy agenda. So, for example, this past legislative session, there was a bill in the legislature called the Hate Crimes Bill. I blocked the Hate Crimes Bill. And I had people on the media say, well, Kimbrell doesn't care about minority communities. Well, that's a complete lie. One of my best friends is Mexican. One of my best friends is Black. I've never, of course I care about racial equality. Of course I do. But that bill was not about racial equality. If you read the language of the Hate Crimes Bill, it was mostly about shutting down churches and charities that disagreed with LGBT ideology. And so I told a friend of mine who works for a large company who's an African-American guy, a great friend of mine, who said, Senator, would you be willing to support a hate crimes bill? I said, sure, I'd be willing to support one. He said, why'd you block this one? I said, because it's not about racial equality. This bill is about forcing the LGBT agenda, even over Christian churches and charities and Christian schools. I said, they take out everything referring to gender identity and sexual orientation, I'll vote for it. He was stunned. And I said, what you need to tell folks that are putting pressure on you about this is Republicans generally, and me particularly, do not oppose racial equality or defending the idea of promoting racial harmony in America. We oppose using the civil rights legacy of the 60s to push a radical sexual agenda that has nothing to do with racial equality.
Wow. There it is. You should ask that question right there.
Go ahead, bro.
So, do you think our government officials have not paid enough attention to cultural issues that are important to their constituents, or do you think it's oh crap, I lost my spot. The opposite.
No, I think that there's a culture war afoot right now in this country. I think my side of the political aisle has not paid as much attention. We felt like, okay, these issues will just go away. They haven't, because make no mistake about it. The battle right now is really not Republican and Democrat is just a surface level fight here. The real fight is between liberty versus tyranny, between freedom and oppression. And we have a Marxist ideology in this country that's wanting to socialize the economy, that wants to shut down God in the public arena, and that wants to push a radical redefinition of human sexuality, marriage and the family, and even try to sexualize our kids. And I feel like my party's been slow to respond to that and has clumsily responded at times. What I've tried to tell people, if you come and talk to me about racial equality or making sure that we have good partnership between police and the communities they serve, or that we make sure everybody has an equal opportunity to pursue success and get a quality education, I'm on board. I support school choice in no small part that the biggest failing schools are in my predominantly minority communities. And I believe school choice would help minority communities the most. And I've supported school choice for 20 years. But what I think has happened is we've turned a blind eye to the fact that you got woke companies like Disney that want to teach sexual agendas to kids as young as 5. We have the Spartanburg County Public Library System, even last week, get into an argument with me because they had a book in the children's section that's basically pornography.
Literally,
it's showing images of sex positions and then talking about questioning your gender as young as 6. Well, that's insane. That's not about diversity and inclusion. That's sick. That's child abuse. And what we've got to start doing is stop letting these left-wing woke organizations divide us along racial lines or demographic lines, and let's focus on what's right and wrong. And I think whether you're white, black, Hispanic, or whatever your background or ethnicity is, the vast majority of people recognize that opportunity for our kids is important. Sexualizing children is abhorrent and wrong. And that ultimately, the only way this country survives is we believe we're one nation under God. I mean, as Reagan used to say, if we ever forget we're one nation under God, we'll be a nation gone under. And friends, we're dangerously close right now to abandoning God completely. And if you believe that freedom can be maintained in a purely secular environment, then I would encourage your listeners to read about the French Revolution, because the French Revolution decided they would just expel God from the public arena. In fact, one of the famous French revolutionaries named Diderot, and he said, we will only be free when the last priest is strangled by the entrails of the last king. And they wanted to secularize society. Well, that doesn't work, because the Declaration of Independence says that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their creator, not by Congress, not by the government, but their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, if you drive the creator out of the public arena and the government becomes the determiner of what are your rights or not, then we're all in real trouble. And we need to focus on that and less on trying to divide each other based on the color of our skin.
Whew. Wow. You just said a mouthful.
Sorry.
No, that's great.
I mean, no, it's great. We love it. I guess we've already kind of established the nation is very divided. I think we can all agree on that. Well, how do you think we can, I guess, from an individual and a local community standpoint, what can we do what do you think we can or should be doing, starting off locally in our communities to, somehow bring more unity, no matter what particular side of the aisle you're on? How do you, what would you think, if somebody asked you that, how can we become a little more unified?
Focus on Christ. I mean, look, I know people don't like whenever you say that as a government official. They, oh, you're a theocrat. I'm not a theocrat. I just believe that the country, that we're in a battle of good versus evil.
Yes.
And I do believe that there's lots of, that we're a nation of faith. Okay, we're a nation of faith. Regardless if you're black or white or Hispanic, it doesn't matter. I mean, there's an enormous community of faith. And we all can agree that there's right and wrong. And we need to focus on that. We need to focus on that and not trying to rewrite history. You got stuff that's very divisive. And I know this is a hot button issue, but I'll take, for example, critical race theory. Okay, critical race theory is trying to gin up dissension among people of different backgrounds. And it's misleading. Is it true that this country had a history of back in this founding era of slavery and oppression? Yes, but it is also true, as I stated at the outset of our conversation tonight, that the majority of the signers of this Declaration of Independence, 2/3 of them, believe that abolition should happen at the beginning of the nation. So so here's the two extremes. I always say there's two extremes. This is where we get divided. So you've got the hard left that says the country was founded by all of them were racists, and we should ignore them all and ignore the founding of the country and rewrite the country and shred the Constitution because everybody was racist. Okay, that is completely a lie and very misleading. Then you got people that want to whitewash history the other way and say the country's perfect and basically the new Israel and it never did anything wrong. Well, that's not true either. We're an imperfect country, but we're a good country. I used to be a banker and I looked at it as the balance sheet of history, the balance sheets, right? When you look at balance sheets, you say assets, liabilities. If you got a positive net worth, is in the assets outweigh the liabilities. In other words, you got more good stuff going for you than negatives, right? If you look at the balance sheet of the United States, we are the most racially equal country in the history of the world. We're the most equal opportunity society in the history of the world. We went to war with ourselves to right the wrongs of the early days of our republic. And we've worked continually to reaffirm the principles of the American founding. We should focus on the fact that if you look at the balance sheet of history, we're a country worth saving. And the reason we're a country worth saving is we're based on eternal truths, imperfectly applied. Alexis de Tocqueville was a French ambassador who came to the United States at the beginning of the country. And he said, America is great because America is good. And if America ceases to be good, she will cease to be great.
Mm.
We need to focus on that. Right now, it's all too much about Republican versus Democrat, black versus white. And that's a complete sideshow. If you're Satan, you love that. Because if you're Satan, that's great. You focus on that. Instead of the fact that we have a bunch of folks who want to teach our kids about changing their gender at 5. Or we have a bunch of people that believe that God should be totally expelled from public life. Or that we have a bunch of folks that want to abort babies to literally the day that child is born. Those are the real evils we need to focus on. So that's what we got to do. We got to get past letting the media and politicians divide us along racial demographics, around age demographics, and focus on what's right and wrong, because what's right and wrong is true for everybody. It didn't change.
So true. Go ahead.
Oh, I thought your question.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you just asked me. My bad. So, question is a hot issue. Why should people be concerned with this? Is about the open borders.
Yeah.
Why should people be concerned about with open borders, and how does it affect the everyday citizen?
Well, so there's a number of problems with that. Number one, there's never been a society in history that did not control its borders and immigration system that remained a society. Because while we do believe in racial equality, while we do believe in the dignity of every life, we're still a nation of law. And if you allow people to come to the country indiscriminately, who do not learn to assimilate into the society or learn the language or learn the history, the culture, then you'll lose the country. Look, and so people say, when you say stuff like that, there'll be people say, oh, you don't like immigrants. I am married to a first-generation immigrant. My wife was not born in the United States.
Wow.
My wife was born in Ukraine. You see what's happening in Ukraine right now.
Oh yeah. Wow.
So my wife moved here at 19 by, without her family, literally in my house where I'm talking to y'all tonight. I have her sister and 2 children who are refugees from Ukraine living with me as we speak. And so obviously I'm not against immigration. I am against people who don't want to respect the laws of the country or assimilate into the country. I don't care what your background is. I don't care if you're Indian or Mexican or Chinese, whatever. If you want to be an American and you want to come the right way, I welcome you to the United States. Learn the English language, learn the history of the country, respect our Constitution, and know your civic obligations. But if you break into the country, then I don't think that's appropriate. And there's no other country in the world that lets you do that. In fact, there was an American Marine who a few years ago, accidentally on a hunting trip in Texas, went across the border to New Mexico, and he was held in a Mexican prison for over a year for breaking their immigration laws. What irony is that? Mexico condemns the United States.
Wow.
Mexico condemns the United States for not granting amnesty to millions of people that come across the Mexican-U.S. border. But one American accidentally, who's a Marine, steps into their country, they put him in jail for a year.
The irony.
So you have to have secure borders or you don't have a country. And by the way, not everybody who's coming to this country is coming here for opportunity or freedom. A lot of folks come here to blow us up. Don't forget, under Obama's presidency, the Iranians, who are avowed enemies of the United States and Israel, sent a strike team to Mexico to come across our open southern border. And they went to Washington, D.C. Just get a load of this. This group of Iranian nationals who worked for the Iranian government broke into the United States through the Mexican border, went to Washington to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to the United States. Every single person that attacked the United States on September the 11th, 2001, came here on a work visa, and overstayed the visa. We didn't deport them from the country, and they attacked the United States and killed 3,000 Americans in a single day.
Yeah.
So that's why people should care, for the preservation of national integrity, preservation of a culture where we can all talk to each other and understand our civic obligations, and national security.
Wow. So I guess a follow-up question to that also would be, how does these open borders also just impact us in our everyday life? So I know I've seen on several news stations or heard from other conversations from commentators of how it doesn't really impact like the national budget or whatnot. It really impacts the states a lot. Especially, I think there's a lot of talk about, I think Texas is dropping off immigrants in DC, or they're busing them in the middle of the night to different states. How does that impact people in their day-to-day?
Well, look, first off, under our law, if you go to a hospital and you go to an emergency room, regardless if you have money or insurance, you're required to be treated. So it puts a lot of people who are illegally in the country, even if they get so much as a common cold, would go to the emergency room because it's free treatment. And then people who have real injuries that need to get in the emergency room can't. And it costs us billions of dollars a year in this country because of that. You have a strain on the resources of our schools in many cases. Law enforcement. Many people who legally come to the country, not the majority, but you've got certainly, I don't think the majority of people who come to the United States, even illegally, are trying to engage in otherwise bad behavior. But you have some, even if it's 10%, that's a lot of people who are involved in human trafficking or drugs or any number of other things that put a strain on law enforcement. So you got to control the border. And if people want to come to the United States the right way, then we have a process for that. But if you want to come to the country illegally, that's not acceptable. And so we've taken a very strong stand in South Carolina. We do not grant in-state licenses, driver's licenses, or professional licenses to people illegally in the United States. I've taken a very strong stance on that as a senator. We have a division in our state law enforcement division to enforce immigration laws in South Carolina, just exactly for the reason that Texas is doing it, so that we don't allow people to violate the sovereignty of the nation or the state. Because our job is to protect the citizens of the state, every citizen, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or background. My job, I swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, and to defend every citizen I represent. Well, part of that is defending the nation's borders.
Wow, awesome. So, who is your favorite government figure, past or present, and why?
Well, I'll give you past, and then I'll give you present. I'll give you past, and I'll give. So I would say past, and I have a lot of favorites. Okay, if I had to pick the top three of the past, and I'll get it down to the top one, I would say George Washington, because of course, and I know that sounds cliche, but this is a guy who really fought hard to make the country, even bring it into existence. Ronald Reagan and Abraham Lincoln, and I'd say my favorite is Lincoln, because he understood the importance of bringing unity to the country along eternal principles. He believed that rights came from God. He believed that unity was critical, and he saved the republic. And so I would say if I ever had a chance to have dinner with a historical figure who's no longer with us, it would be Lincoln. And my current favorite, I would say it's kind of a tie really between Ron DeSantis and Mike Pence, because DeSantis is really doing a good job in Florida, trying to stand up for just basic common sense.
Yeah.
And I applaud former Vice President Pence for being a voice of calm and of faith and reason in a very wild environment.
Very wild environment. Well, it's funny that you mentioned Mr. Florida governor. But why should parents be concerned with the instruction of our children, and what could that lead to in the future if indoctrination and grooming is allowed?
So I'll take these. I just mentioned that Lincoln was my favorite. So I'll quote Lincoln here and say Lincoln said one time that the philosophy of the classroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next. But I think that's true. I mean, I think what you teach, when you teach your children, okay, for example, this past weekend was spring break for our kids. So my wife and I took our boys to Charlottesville, Virginia to tour Monticello. We talked about the good and the bad of Jefferson. Then we went to Richmond and talked about the Civil War and took them to the Virginia State House. They've been to the South Carolina Capitol with me many times. We talked to them about the importance of believing in God and believing our rights come from the Lord. I'm a big believer that what I teach my kids is going to determine what kind of life they live. And what kind of life they live determines what kind of family they raise. What kind of family they raise influences the kind of state and country we are later. So what your kids learn is critical. Yeah. And these are formative years. Most children, by the time they're 18, have already, their personality is pretty much set. If they're going to believe in God, if they're going to love their country, if they're going to believe in dignity and the importance of hard work and honesty and integrity, they're going to learn that before they leave your house. Yeah. What people don't understand is if you don't pay attention to what the schools are teaching them, because the schools have been taken over by secular leftists. I mean, not everybody. There's a lot of great teachers administrators, but the general philosophy of our system now is very secular leftist. And if you let your kids go every day and be taught things you would not teach them at home, don't be surprised when they don't believe what you believe. So you can't consign your kids to the government to raise and then be surprised when they grow up to not be like you.
That's true.
So every parent needs to make a very conscious decision, particularly fathers, in the lives of their kids.
Woo.
That's
Yeah, I got 2 boys. I got a 3-year-old, and I have it'd be 9 months tomorrow. And so,
And that is the single most important job you'll ever have. We got 2 boys, and I tell people all the time, whether it's being in the Senate, and even if it's no secret, I would love to be governor if God opens that door at one point in my life. But even if I became governor, there's no job I would ever have, being senator or any other thing I'd ever be in my life, that would be more important than being a dad, because that's your legacy. And I had a former Attorney General of the United States, Alberto Gonzalez, is a friend of mine. He was the first ever Hispanic Attorney General of the United States under George W. Bush. And he left the White House. He resigned early, and I asked him about that. And he said, well, I realized that my kids didn't recognize me anymore. And I wasn't doing very well with that. He said, I decided that even if I were the most powerful person in the world and I died and my kids hated me, I would have failed at life.
Ooh. Well, family's your first ministry.
That's
I'll tell you
first ministry. So, what are some
and fellas, I hate to tell, I only have a few more minutes. I got another interview tonight, but I really love this conversation. Y'all do a great job.
Yes, sir. So, with that being said, one of the last things that we really want to try to drive home with the people is that this is we always hear it, but we have a very important midterm, or this is a very important election year.
Sure.
In South Carolina, June the 14th, I believe, is the date of the primaries. What do you say to the people? Why should they take an interest in the primary elections and paying attention to the midterm elections?
Well, and I can say this as an observer this time, because I'm not up for re-election again until 2024. So I get to watch this time. I get to vote with y'all, with everybody, not have to run. Look, the entire state House of Representatives is up for election this year. The entire U.S. House of Representatives is up for election this year. Senator Tim Scott is up for re-election this year, the governor and every constitutional officer. If you believe in keeping God in the public square, if you believe in the idea of the dignity of every life, if you believe in educational freedom, if you believe in parental rights, all of those issues are on the ballot this year, every single one of those, because we have a very divided electorate right now, a very, very divided political scene. You've got people who believe in reapplying the principles of America's founding and preserving freedom and honoring God and honoring the notion of family and individual liberty. Then you have folks that want to redefine everything from gender to family to even abolish capitalism. Those are critical. Those are foundational issues. We're not talking about the difference between a 3% or 4% tax here. We're talking about fundamental issues about human existence, human nature, and truth. And those are all critical issues that are on the ballot this year, and we have to get those right. And as I've heard before, the country's only as good as those that show up. So if you can't sit here and say, well, I'm not happy with how the country's going, and then say you didn't vote last time. If you didn't vote, you don't get to complain.
Yeah.
So you got to vote.
Awesome. Senator Kimbrell, thank you so much
for giving us your
time.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing. This is important. The work you're doing is important, and giving people the chance to have open dialogue is really critical, and respectful dialogue. That's one thing we're missing in our country.
Yes.
Is respectful dialogue. It's okay to disagree with people. It's okay to have differences of opinion, but respect and honor are critical.
Yes,
sir.
Thank you for what you do.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So everyone, this is another episode of High Definition Podcast. I'm Maurice.
I'm Therese.
And remember to live life
from the highest definition.
We're going to catch you all on the next episode. And
take care.
Stop it.
Stop record. Yep.